Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I am seeing green, so I'm going to take that as if I am up. And let me check my volume, make sure that's good. I know I said this every time I log on to this channel. I like doing live streams, and I don't necessarily want to lose that particular edge of doing live streams. But I do hate it being on this channel. I really dislike being on this channel. And YouTube takes for fucking ever to do anything. Because at this point, they're not really beholden to anybody. They can do whatever they want. But nevertheless. So this video is going to be relatively quick. I kind of just want to make a very specific and a quick point. And I don't necessarily want to tarry on the point. So I'm just going to make it and I'll move on to the next video. The United States was attacked on 9/11, and that attack on 9/11 has, you could say, propagated the next, 16, 17 years in regards to U.S. foreign policy and even domestic policy to some degree. Now, the Republican that was in office at the time, Republicans are not necessarily the brightest tools in the bunch. They don't necessarily ask the larger contextual questions of why is somebody attacking us? Why would somebody do something like this? Is there something that we ourselves are doing that's propagating this particular behavior or people's animosity towards us as a country? That doesn't come up. They hate us because of our freedoms and we need to go and kick some ass. It doesn't necessarily matter if the ass that you kicked wasn't even the person that did it. So Bush took us into Iraq, took us into Afghanistan, tortured other human beings in order to create a link between Saddam Hussein and bin Laden. The link that didn't exist, by the way, torturing people. One guy hundreds of times. And it's like, what information, if this torture was working in the way that you're trying to convince people that it's working, why do you have to do it that many times? Why are you just torturing this person to this extent? If this was doing what you said it was going to do, you shouldn't have to torture the person that often and that much. At a certain point, it looks like people were just getting their jollies off torturing another human being. My point here, my basic point, and I don't want to tarry too far from it. Were there weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? The answer to that, of course, the answer is no. And I don't know how many people were alive during that time. I was alive during that time. That was within my political awareness. I remember this. I even remember the first Gulf War when George Bush went into kick Saddam out of Kuwait. In fact, I distinctly remember it. I was sitting there playing Super Mario Bros. 2 when word came out that the bombing had commenced. And I didn't necessarily have a good context of what that meant. I didn't quite get that we were actually killing and murdering other human beings. I didn't get it. I didn't grasp it at all. And my mom wasn't necessarily too involved in the politics, at least not to the degree where she could explain, yes, we are taking our military forces and we are murdering other human beings. She couldn't explain that. I didn't quite get that. It was only the second war, the second Gulf War, the less smart kid. That one, that's the one that I really remember that was within my political awareness. And I remember all of the things that they were saying about that war. I remember the New York Times and Washington Post turning into propaganda pieces. I remember CNN pushing this particular narrative, all of these places pushing this narrative that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I remember them, the congressional testimony, where they had the kid come out saying that Saddam Hussein was taking babies out of incubators. I remember this stuff. One report after the next that would come out backing up this idea that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And all of them were wrong. All of them were wrong. None of those people knew what they were talking about. They killed 1 million people in Iraq. They went into one country after they completely destabilized that particular part of the globe. No consequences. Nobody went to jail over that. Nobody got in trouble over that. They lied us into a fucking war in addition to torturing other human beings pursuant to trying to create a link between those two things. No one went to prison. No one went to jail. Nobody was guilty. Mulligan, our bad. It was a fuck up. I'm sorry we killed so many of you. Not to mention, the people who were killed and the people who were streaming into the other countries, they completely destabilized those other countries. Meaning you had military, when the military was disbanded in Iraq, that went into other parts or other parts of the Middle East. It is a straight link. And a straight link, I know is somewhat of a sketchy wording for it, but there is a link between this idea of what took place in Iraq and Afghanistan and what's taking place with regards to ISIS. Those things are not inseparable from one another. The fact that you smashed one country, you essentially destabilized that region of the globe. You can even make an argument that many of the people who are fleeing those other countries into Europe and the destabilization of Europe is in response to what we did when we destroyed that particular part of the globe. And it wasn't just us, it was also Tony Blair. But for all intents and purposes, it was the idiot president that we had that made the decision to do so. Take a look at this. I remember when this took place, this Colin Powell was considered the honest guy. He was the guy who people were supposed to trust. I remember during that time, nobody trusted anyone in the Bush administration. They thought all of these people were idiots. They were backing him because they thought, well, we need to support the president in times of war. And Bush had this upswell of popularity or approval before all of this took place. Meaning the country, for the most part, supported their president, even when the guy was a goofball and even when they understood he was a fucking idiot. They still supported the president. I don't think people understood the depths of depravity that a person would have to be to go into a country and kill that many people for something that didn't necessarily exist. Meaning, I don't think they understood that he would get into the camera and lie in the way that they did. And I don't think they understood that the media would flagrantly tell that particular narrative, being stenographers for the administration itself. I don't think people grasped that that's what was going to take place. Meaning, I think those people trusted their institutions. And I think they looked around and they said, there's no way that everybody is lying to me. There's no way all of these people can be wrong. I mean, everywhere I look, they said they were weapons of mass destruction. I have to believe him. We did get hit. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's right. Maybe he knows something that we don't particularly know. Bush didn't know anything that you didn't know. Maybe to the point that they didn't have any weapons of mass destruction. Maybe he knew it. Maybe he didn't. At the very end of the day, they took advantage of an attack. They went into another country and destroyed that country on the pretext of a lie, on the premise of a lie. This is Colin Powell. Colin Powell was one of the people who was pushing the war. Now, the reason he was so effective at pushing the war is because Colin Powell was considered to be an honest man. He had like an 80% approval rating. People looked at him as being this kind of soldier of sorts and considered him to be the honest guy that was in, for all intents and purposes, somewhat of a scandalous administration. Let's take a look at him selling this war fever. The honest man.
One of the most worrisome things that emerges from the thick intelligence file we have on Iraq's biological weapons is the existence of mobile production facilities used to make biological agents. Let me take you inside that intelligence file and share with you what we know from eyewitness accounts. We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels.
That was fuck up. What I said was, before I never cut the volume back on, the gentleman that's sitting behind Colin Powell here, I can't think of his name. I want to say Ashcroft, but I don't think it's Ashcroft. In fact, I know it's not Ashcroft. It's on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of his name. He's from one of the intelligence services. He's sitting back there, not arbitrarily. Like Colin Powell, either Colin Powell said this or Wilkerson said this. Colonel Wilkerson used to work for Colin Powell. And he made this point that if I'm going to go out there and I'm going to put my ass and credibility on the line to put this out to the public, and to, you know, be on the world stage making this assertion that these guys are doing something nefarious and these guys have weapons of mass destruction, then I want you sitting behind me, for the public to also see you. Meaning he's in that shot because they put him in that shot. He wanted this thing to say, I am not in this alone, and yes, I'm giving this testimony, but this testimony is coming from the guy sitting behind me. Let's keep going.
And on rails. The trucks and train cars are easily moved and are designed to evade detection by inspectors. In a matter of months, they can produce a quantity of biological poison equal to the entire amount that Iraq claimed to have produced in the years prior to the Gulf War. Although Iraq's mobile production program began in the mid-1990s, UN inspectors at the time only had vague hints of such programs. Confirmation came later, in the year 2000. The source was an eyewitness, an Iraqi chemical engineer who supervised one of these facilities. He actually was present during biological agent production runs. He was also at the site when an accident occurred in 1998. 12 technicians died from exposure to biological agents.
That's called propaganda. That's called, whether you want to say he was lying from a knowing perspective, whether you want to say he was misinformed, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, these guys put forth an idea to the American public that was in no way true, that they couldn't necessarily confirm, and in doing so, got 4,000 Americans killed, 1 million Iraqis killed, completely destabilized that particular part of the globe, not to mention the formation of ISIS as a result of their actions. Let's keep going, because there's more I want to show for this. Let's take a look at this one also.
His regime aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al Qaeda.
But it wouldn't be disappointing, would it, if there were no weapons there?
We know for a fact that there are weapons there.
We continue to watch Iraq's involvement in terrorist activities.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
What I want to bring to your attention today is the potentially much more sinister nexus between Iraq and the Al-Qaeda terrorist network.
The Iraqi regime was required to destroy its weapons of mass destruction, to cease all development of such weapons, and to stop all support for terrorist groups. The Iraqi regime has violated all of those obligations. It possesses and produces chemical and biological weapons. It is seeking nuclear weapons.
I picked up a newspaper today, and I couldn't believe it. I read 8 headlines that talked about chaos, violence, unrest, and it just was henny penny, the sky is falling.
Iraq has stockpiled biological and chemical weapons and is rebuilding the facilities used to make more of those weapons.
What is, I think, reasonably certain is the idea that it would take several 100,000 U.S. forces, I think, is far from the mark.
We know that the regime has produced thousands of tons of chemical agents, including mustard gas.
I'm not going to go through all of these. I just kind of really want to nail this home from the standpoint of what the world looked like during this time period, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, when these guys were ramping up for this war effort. All of the media, and from the political standpoint, the majority of the political establishment went with this idea that there were indeed weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. New York Times, Washington Post, all of the main magazines, all of the main journals. If you were not on board, you were, for all intents and purposes, silenced and shut up. Chris Hedges lost his job at the New York Times. Donahue lost his job at MSNBC. People who were against the war effort, for the most part, were shunned and put to the corner. This is one of those. Here's another guy who was part of that process. One of the people who didn't know what they were talking about.
As Director Tenet has pointed out, Secretary Powell presented evidence last week that Baghdad has failed to disarm its weapons of mass destruction, willfully attempting to evade and deceive the international community. Our particular concern is that Saddam Hussein may supply terrorists with biological, chemical, or radiological material.
Robert Mueller is the same guy that's doing the investigation on Donald Trump right now. He's the same one who came out saying that there were 13 trolls, essentially people who were doing Facebook and Twitter ads, spending like a few $1,000s saying bad, disparaging things about Hillary Clinton. And that was enough to topple the election itself. Now, to be fair, Mueller never said that. People added that onto it. People who were looking for anything to cling or hang their hat onto for the reason why the woman lost. And that's not really the point in this, in the sense of the investigation itself. I just kind of want to make this one very specific point. During that time period, people got into this hysteria that Saddam Hussein was going to attack the United States, that 45 minutes and they could attack the United States, that they could drop a bomb on our soil, that all of this could end up being a mushroom cloud. Dick Cheney was supplying information to the newsroom or to the press, and at the same token, Dick Cheney would come back and reference the information that the person in the press gave. So let's say you talk to a reporter, you tell that reporter some kind of secret information, that reporter goes out and prints it. Dick Cheney then comes on to network television, even on like Meet the Press or something like that, and he would say, well, I saw an article in the paper today saying that XYZ took place. Nobody being the wiser that Dick Cheney was the source of that particular thing that was put into the paper. All of the hysteria that was going on, they killed, and I use the term murder because that's exactly what it is when you go into a country and you have no right to go into that country. They murdered 1 million people. Put that in context. They lost 4,000 Americans in the process of murdering those 1 million people. And in addition to all of that, spending trillions of dollars that we're not supposed to even have on this particular war, meaning essentially just burning the money. We're spending $1 trillion right now on military. Now, when people are, and I'm adding in black budget and everything else, I'm rounding it off to $1 trillion. For all the hysteria that's taking place now in regards to Russia hacked us, Russia meddling, Russia attacked America, this is 9/11, this is Pearl Harbor, Donald Trump isn't doing anything, Donald Trump needs to pass sanctions, Donald Trump needs to escalate, why is Donald Trump a puppet of Vladimir Putin? In the same way that there was hysteria back then, I kind of want to put a point in saying this is also hysteria. And to be very aware that in the same way that people were getting carried away back then with all this war talking, war fever, and was willing to go into another country and murder the people of that country, you should be very skeptical about this type of groupthink, this type of behavior, particularly when it's against somebody who you don't particularly like. It is easy to fall for that stuff when it's somebody you don't particularly like. I'm just making the point. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. In the same way, the people who were selling that particular war back then have all of a sudden popped their heads back up to sell that war right now. Or sell, I don't want to say war, sell this conflict, this kind of new Cold War, or this proxy war that's taking place right now. All I'm saying is be very skeptical of the things that people are telling you on this. Be cynical to some degree on the things people are telling you about this. If you know that they have a history of either lying or just outright getting it wrong, magnificently getting it wrong to a breathtaking fucking level. Like, I'm trying to get across how wrong they were on this. And everybody toed the line on this. Meaning person to person to person, for all intents and purposes, toed the line. Regardless of the media you were looking at or regardless of the politician you were listening to. Most people toed the line. You had few people to deviate. Be skeptical about the things that these people are telling you. And 20 years later, you look back on it and be like, oh my God, that was a bit hysterical. That was a bit hysterical. My point is, get that point now, not 20 years later, and not necessarily when you get dragged into something that's a little bit heavier than, well, a little bit heavier than, I should say, the hysteria that you have now. They have moved the nuclear clock to 2 minutes to midnight. That's the closest to midnight. Midnight being oblivion, being this kind of nuclear holocaust that had been since the 50s. This is not me being hyperbolic, and if it is, this is also them being hyperbolic, meaning the nuclear scientists who control that particular faculty. Do not let these people slow walk you into a larger conflict. And that is exactly what they're doing. You have some lefty networks who are downplaying what is taking place. We are arming Ukrainian rebels. Those Ukrainian rebels are going to use those weapons against Russians. That's literally a proxy war. The screaming about the sanctions is literally an escalation. Having this conversation that when something happens, when the United States drop bombs in Syria, that it's not really that big of a deal, completely downplays the fact that you're dropping bombs in another goddamn country. They're slow walking you into war, downplaying the big items that are taking place, these kind of goalposts along the way from this. If Russia decided that it needed to get a nuclear weapon, it's doing so because it felt that it needed to defend against this kind of aggression from NATO nations. You're literally surrounding their country, and in surrounding their country, I would imagine, like anybody else, you would have some feelings about that. They're crowding your borders. The United States was willing to go to nuclear war for for Cuba. What would be something similar with regards to Russia? That's what I'm asking. I'm saying, when you look at the world, also look at the world from the standpoint of how those people are taking your actions. And in this very specific case, knowing that they were wrong before, knowing that they were magnificently wrong before, why should you just take just outright what everybody is saying and what everybody is screaming about right now as being completely flat fact true? And even if you do want to take the Russia hysteria as true, meaning there were Facebook and Twitter ads, even if you want to say, you're right, there were Facebook and Twitter ads, what is your response? And what should that response be? And should that response be something more internal of, hey, maybe we should get our own house in order, maybe we should get our own affairs in order, and we do this shit around the globe also, so that we don't necessarily have standing to say or do anything in some kind of aggressive fashion against something like this, outside of getting our own house in order? This hysteria is problematic, and this hysteria is extremely dangerous. And the fact that this comes from the left is even that much more worrying. It's that much more worrying. I understand that there are some people from the left saying, well, we don't want a war, but we don't want this or that. But the fact that you're adding in the but gets across the reality of the situation. You are asking for provocation. And the way that you're pushing Donald Trump on this is, you need to do something to show me that you're not in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. And I got to be honest, I don't know what that would be in order to get that across, because everything that takes place is filtered through the lens that Donald Trump is in the pocket of Vladimir Putin, despite one thing after the next that's taken place that's putting us closer and closer to the brink of some kind of conflict. This is one more video, and I saw this on Jimmy Dore, and this blew me away. I've seen Thomas Friedman get his ass handed to him in debates before. But it's one thing to hear Thomas Friedman get his ass handed to him in a debate. It's another thing to hear Thomas Friedman talk like a fucking lunatic and a maniac. This is Friedman. This is one of those people who are also pushing for the war, or pushing for this thing of Russia hacked us, Russia attacked us, and all this other stuff. This was taken back in 2003. So this is a few years after we went into Iraq.
Worth doing, Charlie. And I think that looking back, I now certainly feel I understand more what the war was about. And it's interesting to talk about it here in Silicon Valley, because I think looking back at the 1990s, I can identify that there are actually three bubbles of the 1990s. There was the NASDAQ bubble. There was the corporate governance bubble. And lastly, there was what I would call the terrorism bubble. And the first two were based on creative accounting. The last was based on moral creative accounting. The terrorism bubble that basically built up over the 1990s said, flying airplanes into the World Trade Center, that's okay. Wrapping yourself with dynamite and blowing up Israelis in a pizza parlor, that's okay. Because we're weak and they're strong, and the weak have a different morality. Having your preachers say that's okay, that's okay. Having your charities raise money for people who do these kinds of things, that's okay. And having your press call people who do these kind of things martyrs, that's okay. And that built up as a bubble, Charlie. And 9/11 to me was the peak of that bubble. And what we learned on 9/11 in a gut way was that that bubble was a fundamental threat to our open society. Because there is no wall high enough, no INS agent smart enough, no metal detector efficient enough to protect an open society from people motivated by that bubble.
Just to be clear, the question that was asked him was, should we have gone into Iraq? Was the war in Iraq worth it? And his argument is, we had to pop a bubble. We had to pop a bubble. There was a bubble of terrorism. We had to pop that bubble. This guy is considered an intellectual on the New York Times. This guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he's saying that we had to pop a bubble by going into a country and kill 1 million people in that country. And just to add, the little problem with the statement is, they didn't attack us. They didn't attack us. They weren't the people who hit us. They weren't the people who hit us. His argument is, we need to pop a terrorist bubble by going into a country that did nothing to us and murder a lot of people. That's his argument. That's the argument that he's making right here to Charlie Rose. Now, I'm amazed by this because, like I said, I've heard Friedman make the case and do the rah-rah thing before, and it magnificently lacks context. Like, he never asked the question. This guy was supposed to be an intellectual, never asked the question of why. Why would somebody do that? It's as if that has nothing to do with the equation. It has nothing to do with the price of tea in China. Why would somebody do that? Is there anything that you yourself are doing that is causing a behavior that's taking place in the world? That's off the table. That has nothing to do with the price of tea in China. And in his mind, it's perfectly okay to go into another country and kick the shit out of people who did nothing to us. These people are maniacs. That's my point. Be very aware that either they could be wrong or either they don't know what they're talking about. And in the last case where they were wrong and they didn't know what they're talking about, they killed 1 million people. They killed upwards of 1 million people. So I am going to leave it at that. This one wasn't supposed to go this long. I was showing more of the video. But still, my point remains. In the same way that these guys were wrong then, you need to take with a grain of salt what these guys are saying now. In the same way they were being hysterical then, you need to look back in time and say, I remember when they were hysterical then. I need to be a little bit more skeptical now and not necessarily get caught up in their hysteria. So that's my point. That is my point. Let's see. If we have a difficult time getting here, there is no way Hillbots is lurking. I'm an alienated intellectual. Terrence McKenna. I love that. I love that. Alienated intellectual. All right. I'm not going to keep this one too long. Whether Trump won or Hillary won or Cruz won, we would still have found a way to escalate with Russia. There's been escalating. We're fighting Russians right now in Syria. We're giving them weapons in Ukraine, Jay. I mean, we're giving them weapons. And I'm saying that we're giving terrorists weapons. In Syria. I mean, it's fucking amazing. And Tulsi Gabbard comes out and says it on CNN outright. You know, it's like tell the truth, shame the devil. And that's exactly what she does. And Jake Tapper takes the government position on this and reflexively backs away. And as a good stenographer, explains the government's standpoint on this. Mind you, she had just came from Syria. She had just seen what was taking place with her own eyes, saw what was taking place. And despite Jake Tapper being the news person and her being the politician, she in that moment took over CNN and had to explain what was taking place in Syria to the wider American audience, who up to that point was getting bullshit from CNN. Be very skeptical. That is my point. Be ambiguous. Be skeptical of what is coming out or what's taking place around you. And don't necessarily go with this kind of hysterical thinking that some of these people have. And understand that a lot of this stuff is motivated because those people hate Trump. So they're looking for anything to hit Donald Trump on. And in this case, they're willing to position us against a nuclear power in order to do that and accomplish those ends. All the while saying that it's not something that's going to happen, that people are being hyperbolic, talking about the war foot. Why do you think Russia decided that it needed to get a different weapon? Why do you think that? Do you think that countries decide that they're going to devote massive amounts of money to their military just for the sake of devoting massive amounts of money to their military? Sometimes. The United States does. We do so for this kind of world supremacy of sorts, this being the policeman of the world, wasting our resources for stuff like this. But for a country that doesn't have anywhere near our economy, meaning the richness of our particular economy, and for a country that spends nowhere near the amount that we spend on military, meaning the amount that we raised our military budget was the amount that Russia spends for the entirety of its military. The $80 billion that could have paid for healthcare, that could have paid for education. I'm sorry, not healthcare. Could have paid for education. That amount of money was the amount of money that Russia raised their military budget in its entirety. So I'm trying to get across this idea of how much we spend versus how much they spend. And so the hysteria that's taking place here is somewhat unfounded. It's unfounded. And they're not giving you the proper context to look at this stuff. And they're just being hysterical, and they're screaming about Pearl Harbor and 9/11 as opposed to actually, why would somebody do X? What is the reason for somebody to do X? Are there certain solutions that we can do in order to deal with these things without necessarily going through this process of escalation? Are there non-violent ways? Are there peaceful solutions? Are there ways that don't necessarily push the president into this kind of militaristic stance or militaristic position? Right now, what the left is screaming about, lefties, they have to remind people that they're true progressives, or well, I'm deeply progressive, those guys. What they're screaming about is, I need proof that you're not a Putin puppet. And the question is always, what is that proof? If Donald Trump nukes Moscow, would that be enough of a proof? What's the proof that you require to get across this idea that this guy is not a Putin puppet? Arming other people in order to kill Russians, that seems to not be enough. Ensconcing the United States military in Syria, that doesn't seem to be enough. Bombing Syrians, even though they're allied with Russia, that doesn't seem to be enough. Nothing seems to be enough. Nothing seems to be adequate. Be very wary and be very skeptical. That's all I'm saying. That is all I'm saying. All right, guys, I am going to end it here. I'm going to update this on my other channel. Zox, my argument, he did it. Trump did it. Listen to Jenk's devastating arguments against Cal. Oh, that's funny. That's funny. It's devastatingly missing arguments against Cal. You know, what's wild about that is, and I'll end it on this. If you take the position that anything that takes place fits within my context of the world, and look, everyone has a filter. Everyone. Nobody gets away from it. When I was talking to Debbie, and Debbie was like, you think I start from one end and go somewhere else? The answer is yes, because everyone does. Everyone makes, to some degree, somewhat of an hypothesis. Everyone feels about a particular thing in a certain way, and those feelings guide what their thinking is on it. So everybody does it. If you take the position that X is true, and every bit of information that comes in, you filter it through X. So if this goes against my idea, then this really doesn't apply. If it goes in line with my idea, this absolutely applies. The argument with Cal that Jen had was effectively that everything that Cal put up was substantial and legit, and Jake would ignore it. Either those were Nerf bombs. Those were Nerf bombs. That's the point. I got to be honest. That's the one that annoys me the most. Those were Nerf bombs. Or it's like, yeah, dude, they're arming people in Ukraine. They're fucking bombing Syrians. Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't have any control over that. He's a Putin puppet. It's like, okay. I would say listen to the debate yourself. Cal was being extremely respectful because I know he likes Cenk a lot, but Cenk got his ass handed to him in that argument. So these guys have been, you know, screaming that the sky is falling for God knows how long, and they're on a lefty network, by the way. I love the fact that he had to remind people that I'm deeply progressive. I love that. Absolutely love that. All right, I'm gonna end this. Jamal, there's no way a ski? I don't know what a ski is. Oh, will you be back, Jamal Ski? Maybe-ish. There's another video that I wanted to do. I wanted to do this video with, there's this guy from Mother Jones that's been harassing Katie Johnston, Shane Baer, or something to that effect. And she made this point to him like, yeah, I believe you should work with people who are trying to advance your interests. That's too highbrow for him. He doesn't understand that. It's way above his head. It's way above his pay grade. The wild part about this is this guy is supposed to be a senior reporter, and that's sad. where you don't necessarily have the intellectual capability to understand what the person is saying without necessarily, like, the argument against what she's saying is usually boiled down to, you said Chernovich, so you're a horrible person, as opposed to actually reading what the fuck she was actually saying. I was going to do an article on that. I don't think I'm going to do a video on that one. But there is one more that I want to do. Jordan's back. And Jordan has his own channel now, Jordan Sheridan. And there's a part of this video where he talks about the allegations against him that I'm fascinated by. Like, I'm fascinated by it on two fronts. I don't want to get too far into it here because it's going to fuck up this video. Well, this video is already going way too long, so fuck it. There's a part of the video where he starts talking about, where he says the stuff that was said about me is not true. The way that the money was being spent, I've never had an issue. I've had expense accounts before with other companies. He's careful not to go too far into it, but at the same token, he's like, this is not true, this is bogus. And what I realized was that what they said against him actually was far more brutal than what I realized. So I took it as, yeah, they did fire him, and they came out with a story saying that, you know, you can't have orgies at the place and all this other stuff. I think what was more damaging, that the orgy thing wasn't the thing that was damaging. I think that's the thing that everyone focuses on. I like the word orgy. I don't know why. But that's the thing that everyone focuses on. Like, that's the thing that everybody zooms in on. Like, they said he was, you know, they said it was rape. And then later on you find, well, these guys were having an orgy. One person necessarily wasn't on board after the fact. And he gets fired. He gets fired. Now, Cenk Uygur comes out. And Cenk Uygur makes a statement. And the statement puts a knife in him. And I didn't realize how much of a knife it was until I saw that last video. Because the last video got across, I don't want to say worry, but it got across this thing of the need to reassure people that what was said wasn't true. But that didn't boil down to this thing of the orgy or anything else. This boiled down to, I'm not using money in the way that they say I was using money. I wasn't wasting money in this way. I wasn't taking people's money and just using it for drinks and orgies. Like, I've worked at other companies. This was not somewhat of an issue at the other companies. They're saying that this is an issue here, etc., etc., etc. Essentially, they were damaging his reputation in this very specific way. And if your job is a reporter and you're working at some other company and they can't trust you with the expense account because the last company put a knife in you saying that you couldn't be trusted with it, that's somewhat of a big fucking deal. I mean, that directly impacts your capacity for employment, especially if you're trying to work with somebody else. Can somebody else hire you at that point when your previous employer said you essentially stole their cash? I didn't understand the story from that context before. It was only when I watched his last video I thought to myself, I was like, oh, yeah, he's spending a lot of time talking about this very specific point. Yeah, that was probably problematic. So, Kfar, he's aggressively pushing himself in a humble way. Humble. Yeah, humble. I'm willing to listen to Jordan's commentary for now. I don't think he was a rapist, yeah. However, some of the videos he has put out lately are pretty cringy. He seems... Yeah, I didn't get the cringy feeling. I got the feeling of, yeah, I didn't get the cringy feeling. I got a different feeling from it. Like, my feeling was more, you're on a channel, you have like 200,000 people on that channel. You're doing amazingly well. You're doing great work from the standpoint of just journalism. You're hitting stories that you yourself want to hit. You're hitting stories that mainstream media completely ignores. You're riding relatively high. You're doing your thing. Having orgies after work. You're doing your thing. And a big splashy headline comes up and say you're a rapist. Oh God. Like that's brutal. And even when you fight those charges, you're going to have these people who are somewhat rabid against you on this front. So you lose your job. And you lose your job in this kind of big splashy way where it's slightly embarrassing. All these people know about your business. It's not you were working with an employer, kind of just brought you to the side and said, we're going to close this down. The employer, in this case, comes out with a statement, putting a knife in you, saying that, we can't have him doing X, Y, Z, and they just cut him loose right off the bat. If you're out of work for 3 or 4 months, I can kind of understand where you're coming from. Like, I can see. You're saying cringy. I don't call it cringy. I didn't. Cringy wasn't a feeling. I got more of the feeling of I had something substantial and I want to get that thing substantial back. That was what I felt. And the next time that it's done, I want to do it in my way. So in his case, you know, it's trying to do a channel. I want that channel to be big. I'm starting that channel from scratch. I want to get something back of what I had before. That's the way I took it. At least that's why I'm taking this channel. Jordan was cast down from TYT heaven into hell's kitchen. Yeah. Jordan's message is also outdated. He is using 2016 type pro Sanders messaging. Oh, that's what you mean when he says, yeah. Badger Damon, it's never me. Garden, most channels are still stuck in 2016. That's what I was gonna say. I don't. Bernie Sanders is the most popular politician in Washington. I mean, in the United States. You may have some people on the far left who are pissed off at him. Fuck, me being one of them, at least in the things that he's been towing recently. And even Dore. Like, one of the things that blew me away, Dore was having a conversation where they were talking about Tulsi Gabbard, and somebody asked him about somebody for president, and he says, yeah, I want Tulsi Gabbard and I want Bernie Sanders for vice president. Now that's amazing. Like that's fucking amazing. I heard that and I sent Dore a question asking him, like, wait a minute, did you just drop Sanders? Like, what's going on? Because I wanted to know whether or not what Sanders was doing was bugging him as much as it was bugging me, and I think it is. I was more so curious about that from the standpoint of how deep does that go, and if he's willing to put Tulsi Gabbard in as number 1 and put Sanders in as number 2, that should tell you something. That should tell you something. But that being said, I don't know if the rest of the country is there, if that makes sense. I don't know if the rest of the country is there. So, did you see that thing pulled out of his back? that thing pulled out of his back. I might have been wrong. He might not have gotten much from the settlement. Who knows? Most channels and stuff stuck in 2016, yeah. Who says Sanders is popular? CNN, MSNBC, NPR? Bob, I would say most polls that you look at from the Sanders standpoint show Bernie Sanders is relatively popular. I don't know what else you're going to use if you're not going to use polls. I mean, that's what it boils down to. There's a difference between pro-Sanders messaging in 2016 and the messaging used in 2018. Jordan is behind the times in the rhetoric. Yeah, I got to disagree with you on that one. I didn't necessarily see anything wrong with this vid. Like I said, there seemed to be a strong emphasis on trying to raise cash. So yes, the Sanders thing didn't bother me too much. That didn't feel like that was a reason for this video. Like, it felt like he was trying to protect Sanders, if that makes sense, while at the same time kind of pushing this idea of a media empire. Maybe I need to look at it again. But that's the way I take it. Alright, guys, I am going to end this. This video has went massively over. It was supposed to be like a 10-minute video. So, shit happens. Alright, if you guys enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, and subscribe. And of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. Thanks, everyone. Where's